All right. Hello, everybody out there. Thanks for joining us today. I am Paul Redding, SVP of Channel and Community here at CyberQP. I'm joined today by Kevin Barton from my team and the Hudu team, which is one of our newest and biggest partners here at CyberQP, joined by Ken Moten and Jordan Hart. Say hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right.
Hey, how's it going?
Awesome. So this webinar that we're doing today, gentlemen, thanks for joining us. As some folks out there may know, and I know all of us are very aware, CyberQP and Hudu have just completed work on a very deep integration between these two products. It's really aimed at allowing MSP partners across the channel to be able to integrate least privilege and the privilege access management layers of cybersecurity into their documentation and systems management, right? And so between the two systems and the two organizations, what we get to do is give you kind of that single pane of glass effect where you have one place to work for each one of these major features, but everything ties in together. We're very, very excited about that today. And as I said, I am joined with kind of some of the brains behind Hudu. So gentlemen, since we're hosting, a lot of these folks know us a little bit better. Why don't y'all jump in and tell me a little bit about yourselves? Ken, I'll start with you, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Moten. I'm the Information Security and Compliance Manager at Hudu. I've been with Hudu for about 2 years, just specializing in making sure we're compliant with a variety of frameworks such as GDPR, ISO 27001, 27701, SOC 2, sorry about that, and just a variety of different compliance frameworks of the full life cycle, making sure that we have our controls designed properly and implemented properly to secure our customers' data.
Awesome. And Jordan, tell us a little bit about your role, if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jordan Hart. I'm the product manager here at Hudu. I have been with the company for just over 4 years and handle a lot of coordination between kind of where the product's going and coordination between the different teams, engineering, marketing, support. So got my fingers in a lot of different areas of Hudu, but yeah, very excited to kind of talk on the compliance side and how the CyberQP integration really assists with that and elevates the experience for customers.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. And joining us from our side is Kevin Barton, who's really kind of your counterpart, Jordan, does very much the same thing for us over here at CyberQP. Kevin, why don't you jump in real quick and just tell us a little bit about yourself and the role you play here, please?
Yeah, so I'm the director of product for CyberQP. Joined the company about 5-6 months ago now. And so really excited about all the stuff we've been releasing. We've been releasing quite a lot of new features and development wise. And so, yeah, my main role is just to listen to partners, gather our feedback, pay attention to what's going on in the industry. And so really looking forward to this conversation around, compliance and all of the regulatory changes that are coming our ways and the best ways that we can support our partners.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, for those of you out there that don't know me as well, I am Paul Redding. Like I said, I'm our SVP at Channel here. I was an MSP myself for about 14 years. My MSP was very heavy in U.S. healthcare and then the Department of Defense supply chain. So think HIPAA, obviously, but the NIST frameworks like 800-171 that gave birth to CMMC and some of these other DIBCAC style compliance standards. That's really where I cut my teeth. After I left that side of the industry, I actually worked in the GRC space for quite a long time. So I really, if anything, was kind of born in the compliance era as it kind of launched across the MSP space over the last few years. And therefore, in many ways, I think that's the way that my experience it colors the lens through which I see our industry as a whole. So hopefully this should be a fun conversation. And it is going to be a conversation out there, folks. We're not going to try to beat you to death with slides. This is really us talking about the things that we've put together, why we think this is important, and what it really means for the MSP market out there. So I'm going to go ahead, at least for right now, and kill those slides and go ahead and get started in this conversation. So Really, Kevin and Jordan, I'll start with you guys, and I don't know who wants to go first, but let's talk a little bit about the integration itself between Hudu and CyberQP, what we're doing there, and the way that these two products touch, and maybe tell me a little bit about that. Since you're the guest, Jordan, I lied. I'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. Yeah, so I think so I guess I'll start off with the challenges that users may be facing before utilizing CyberQP and what they might experience after utilizing CyberQP. And that really comes down to kind of the password management and being able to securely update and have those changes reflect inside of the documentation product itself. Documentation serves as your kind of household for all of that information that may be critical for your business. And where CyberQP really comes in and allows them to elevate that experience is taking care of those refresh tokens and automating those password changes on a schedule while also having it reflect across the different vendors or products that the customer may be using.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Kevin, I'll ask you in kind of a flip side to that coin. So, as we've integrated with products like Hudu and we allow our managed service providers to do what Jordan's talking about here, where you can reach in and you can change those passwords and all that stuff. One of the coolest features that I think we've really focused on in the last year or so in CyberQP has been our discovery tool, which I think really meshes well with what you guys are doing over at Hudu. So, Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about the discovery tool itself and how that can be used to actually find all those accounts in the first place and make sure they get documented over here the right way to begin with?
Yeah, really the nice thing about having an integration with Hudu is the tech efficiency standpoint, where because we can do all the discovery, we have a much wider understanding of what some of the network's passwords, credentials are. We're securing all of those and updating and syncing those into Hudu. So from a technician standpoint, all the information they need for their day-to-day is kind of just right there inside of a single platform. We just streamline a lot of the access control side. So when that credential needs to get rotated every day, you don't have to worry about updating constantly your documentation, right? It's all just done automatically behind the scenes. So it's really just about being able to actually have zero standing knowledge, trust around your network, and just syncing that into your documentation just makes it that much easier to get the buy-in and the adoption from your technicians so that it's not super disruptive to their day-to-day.
Well, and Ken, I think that actually moves over to, I'll call it our side of the table, right? From a compliance perspective, one of the most difficult things for me as an MSP, and I'm sure you've seen this too as you go through your own environment, is finding all the privileged accounts and being able to truly say when you fill out an insurance form, or Ken, you touched on stuff like SOC 2, Type 2. One of the questions they're going to ask every time is, okay, have you identified all the privileged accounts within your environment? Have you documented who has what layer of access to what, right? So I think that one of the things that's really cool about this is you guys give such a great place once you have that information and pull it together, and from an audit trail perspective, day-to-day basis, know where that stuff lives. We have a way to find that. So Ken, as you've experienced over the last few years that on your side, what do you think about that? That now you not only can say, okay, once I've got it, I can put it in here, but now your partners have a way to go out and find this stuff on their own.
I mean, absolutely. I feel like in a lot of scenarios, organizations really prioritize the technical controls and capabilities, and documentation sort of takes a back seat because they don't necessarily see the value add in telling their compliance story. But what I've seen across my career is that maturity is directly related to your documentation. And so especially when you're talking about passing an audit, you can have a technical control in place, but that auditor has to understand that technical control. They have to understand what you're doing, how it achieves the objective of the control. And one way you can kind of frame that and scope that and point them in the right direction is through your documentation. So you can cut your audit costs significantly, and you can direct them where you want them to go. And also, you can better manage your program because you have a record of truth of what it is you're doing. And that can be referred through continuously by your SMEs, by anybody to understand your security best practices.
Well, I imagine, especially for you, because as a vendor, you're handling your own internal security. So you see some of that on your side, right? When these auditors come in, if you didn't have good documentation, it'd make it a hell of a lot harder for you to pass your own audits, right?
Absolutely. You can be secure without documentation, but then the onus is on the organization to prove that. But now when you have documentation, you're telling them, hey, these are the controls we have in place, and these are the processes that we follow to ensure that we meet these controls consistently. Because again, we're talking about the goal should be not to be secure. It is assurance that at all times you're secure. And that documentation serves as kind of your guidelines and your reference point to make sure that that's the case.
So one of the things I said in the beginning is, I come out of the HIPAA space, right? So the U.S. healthcare compliance. And if you go back and look at it over the last 20 years or so, it's a great example of what you're talking about. The law actually is all focused on documentation until they release this new security rule that they're kind of like bantering around right now and trying to kind of rebuild what that looks like. To this point, if you want to be HIPAA compliant, it's all in your documentation. It's all in your paperwork. The technology, the actual implementation of the controls is less important in that standard than the documentation and proof around it. And I think that's hard for MSPs and IT people to get their heads around sometimes, because we think in such literal terms, you must do this. But to your point, I don't care if you did it or not. If you can't prove it to the auditors, you're still going to fail, and you're still not going to achieve your compliance standard, which I think is what honestly is driving half the decisions in our space right now are around compliance. So a couple of specific questions, and one I want to start in terms of you guys. So Jordan, Ken, this is on your side of the table. Why do you think it is that documentation is still one of the most overlooked components in audits and compliance in general? Why is everybody missing that?
Again, I think it comes down to perceived efficiency. We live in a rapidly evolving cybersecurity threat landscape, and the fastest way to be secure seems to be, in most organizations' minds, seems to be implement a tool. And you can have security, but do you have consistency? How do you know you're dotting your I's and you're crossing your T's? Tools have to be configured properly to be effective. And so, that's why the documentation is so important, because the documentation is what you use to show that this control is configured, this technology is configured. So if you have a SIM, you need to understand, you need to prove to your auditor what events you're ingesting and correlating. And so that's one example of why you want to have that documented. Like I say, it's not 100% necessary. Can you pass an audit without having that documented? Yes, but there's a large room for human error, because you don't have a list of requirements. I need all of these logs ingested. I need these things correlated. I need certain alerts, and you can hand them that documentation, and then they can review your configuration, and then they can go ahead and determine whether you're in compliance. But if you don't have that documentation, maybe there's low risk areas that you have documented that do not need to be addressed. And so from that standpoint, if there's not an official decision made to exclude certain things and documentation to back that up, maybe you're just trying to get out of a deficiency on the fly. And that's why you want to have that documentation to prove that, hey, we made decisions to implement these security tools, these processes in a certain way, and what we omitted, we can back that up through, our risk management program. And we did a risk assessment, following a methodology from an authoritative source that's well respected in the industry. So at the end of the day, it's really how you dot your I's and cross your T's and show that, you have a comprehensive security program, and, you have visibility where there is risk, and where you don't have visibility, you want to have documentation that shows there is very minimal risk, or that at least it is below the organization's risk tolerance threshold.
Well, Ken, back to kind of, that documentation versus implementation piece. I can't tell you how many audits I've had the displeasure actually in my life to have to deal with. I mean, and at one stage I was going through quite a lot in terms of clients and working with healthcare groups. And the two things that every audit begins with is a documentation review and a review of access privilege. The two questions, they're going to either lead to a quickly wrapped up investigation by a group like the Office of Attorney General or Inspector General, rather, or Health and Human Services, or any of those kind of groups. The first two things they're going to ask is, okay, first of all, for all these controls you say you have in place, how do you prove it? And they're going to ask for your documentation and your paperwork. And they expect it to be organized and in such a way that it doesn't require them to dig through mountains of files, right? Like this should be something you can put together quickly. And the next thing they're going to ask is, so who has access to what? How do you know? How are you documenting what access level your users, your employees, the doctors, or the engineers, like, how do you document this stuff? And so it's funny, people think, I didn't encrypt all my computers, I'm going to get a fine. I didn't update antivirus on certain systems, maybe I'm going to get hit. If they get to that point in your audit, in any of those cases where it's a punitive audit, it's actually because your documentation and your least privilege wasn't in place to begin with, right? It's because of the flaws that they found in your reporting that makes them go down this path that gets punitive and painful. And so, in that forgotten kind of back end of things that can be both documentation and truly privilege access management becomes two of the linchpins that you're going to be held accountable to when you move forward. So Kevin, that actually moves stuff over to your side of the table for a second. What are the two or three most underutilized features of our product that could make a major impact for MSPs in dealing with what we're talking about now in terms of compliance and documentation and being able to prove this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the whole time you were talking about that there, I was just thinking, before you ever get to that stage of your audit, what we hear and what we see from a lot of our partners is right away they get dinged on, hey, you have a bunch of passwords that are stale, you have a bunch of accounts that aren't, in use anymore. And it comes down to kind of an implementation thing. And so the nice thing about Hudu and CyberQP working together is, again, it streamlines that implementation. So if you do want to have all of your passwords rotating, even your, break glass accounts or any of the discovery piece about, hey, I just took over this client, it's a new client to me, what did the former MSP or the former on-site IT used to have out there? So we do all that discovery piece, bring it into our system, make sure that it's actually secure, strip out all the privileges, and then you can sync that into Hudu so that when you are looking at it from inside of Hudu for that documentation piece, you can show that compliance of, yep, I know what's on my system, I know what privileged accounts are out there, and I don't have to worry about failing an audit because, these break glass accounts were there for 365 days, never got changed once. And so that's one of the more, I wouldn't say underutilized. A large amount of our partners do use that feature because it is so key. But one of the things that we do that's kind of different in the space than perhaps some of the others is we're also making sure that all your technicians have named accounts. So in the context of compliance, that is a big deal. You can't always just have a shared account for all of your technicians because when you do get your compliance, that's not going to stand up. You're going to have to make sure that you're aware of which technicians are accessing which systems for how long. All of that's built into CyberQP in a really streamlined, easy way. And that's going to be one of the things that you're going to have. Not everyone's aware of how easy and how that ends up working from our perspective. And when it comes to spinning up those accounts, having the technicians log in, we have a feature called passwordless login. I always say it's easier to log in with the passwordless login feature when I use it than if I had to actually type in my username and my credential. It takes me longer to do that than to just use the passwordless login, which is a really nice feature that I think a lot of people kind of underappreciate.
So, question about that really, I'll kick it back over to your side there, Jordan, because something that Kevin touched on, we think is very important. So when you're building out a product like Hudu, I would imagine you guys have many layers of access level for the technicians and the people that are going in using this product. But I'm curious, how frequently do you think it is that without some kind of privilege access management on the back end, all the techs in these environments have access to pretty much all the passwords that they're putting in there, right? Like that a lot of MSPs are dumping this stuff in there. Is that something you see pretty frequently?
I think it's, I guess I wouldn't necessarily say we see it, but I can definitely imagine that it happens pretty frequently. Just in terms of bad practice, I guess, in letting technicians have more access than they need, by giving them potentially access to, you know, a full company or an entire bucket that they, you know, the one technician may need access to, but others can't. And we've really focused our product development on trying to make that as easy as possible, with as many different avenues as possible for them to do that, restricting, you know, at that high level company bucket level, at the password folder level, with security groups or multifunctional security groups. So they can really tailor that. Because I do think if you don't have those avenues for them, for each technician and specific to each technician, you're going to get some of those bad practices of just adding them to maybe a single, you know, technicians group instead of breaking it into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, really choosing and customizing what each of those levels should have access to.
Well, I think that's one of the really cool things about the integration between the two products is partners that are using us have already gone and built out all these security groups, and they've layered in access levels for their technicians, and it plugs in so seamlessly over there that, you know, in Hudu now, a partner using CyberQP can literally choose that only level 2 or even level 3 engineers have access to the keys to the kingdom that you guys are holding, in the form of those super admin accounts and these, like, we call them break glass or tier 0 accounts, right? Meanwhile, their technicians are actually functioning without ever having to touch that side of it. They have all the documentation in Hudu that they need to do their jobs, but they're blocked out of that one critical place that people like me and Ken don't need a level 1 technician in, right? Like, I don't need a level 1 technician with access to any of these administrative credentials on their own. And God forbid, I mean, that's like the highest churn part of your entire organization. Every time you hire or fire a level 1 guy, you got to change that stuff. So I think it's really cool the way the two products kind of interact there in a way that allows those high level engineers to still go into your platform, know those credentials are fresh. If they're copied and pasted, they're changed immediately afterwards, and that hygiene is in place. But we can block those low level from technicians rather from ever actually going and touching that stuff in the beginning. I think it's super cool. So, I mean, Jordan and Ken, I'll leave this one on your side of question. So how are leading MSPs using Hudu to maintain real documentation tied to stuff like privilege access? And as a side note, I would almost say, you know, are you seeing a larger demand for stuff like ours feeding this, or how do you see it being built?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, first and foremost, organizations, you know, they need to lock down who can see, who can access, you know, their privileged information. And, you know, in Hudu, you know, you have the ability to provide restrictions through security groups. You know, you can create a privileged ops group and just restrict that to only those who require that. So that's a way that you can, you know, sort of enforce your role-based access control. We also have that down to the folder level. And, you know, speaking to real-time documentation, you know, with Hudu and with CyberQP, you can really automate the source of truth for privileged identities. You know, when a password rotates with CyberQP, the integration with Hudu through Hudu's API, it overwrites that credential in the right folder. And it attaches a timestamp to that, you know, no human involvement required, but you have an audit trail of, you know, the management of your privileged accounts. And so, you know, that's very important, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to attribute privileged actions to an individual. And a lot of times you have multiple technicians working in an environment. And so in order to kind of manage that and keep that, you know, segregated and in a way that you can attribute those actions, you know, this integration, you know, it fully enables that. And, you know, outside of that with Hudu, you know, you can have real-time inventory syncing and audit logs and audit trails on those assets. And again, these are things that are going to be very important when it comes to an audit. It's going to allow you to, at any, you know, as your inventory changes, your documentation, that real-time feed changes and your dashboard changes. And that way, you can show your auditor that not only do you have visibility, what's in your environment, and you have visibility into the changes. And that way you can identify unapproved or malicious changes. So, definitely change management is supported in that scenario. Like I say, these are high risk actions. These are high risk credentials and roles. So they're going to be some of the main areas of focus in an audit. So, so all of these things together will definitely support you in meeting your compliance goals.
And you touched on a lot right there. And a lot of my experience was in doing risk assessments, large scale medical, large scale military stuff. One of the things that gets missed in risk assessments so many times is when you touched on this, when you talk about inventory, we go out and we get serial numbers and make and model and hardware configuration and all that stuff. And by the way, that's critically important. And absolutely, the auditors want to know the serial number and the device. But the truth is, the auditors don't care what the processor is. The auditors don't care what any of the physical attributes of any of these systems are. That's not their concern. One of the things that they do care about that gets left behind so many times is what administrative accounts exist on these systems, right? And as a former MSP, finding local admin accounts and being able to document them. And I used a legacy documentation system back then that didn't have nearly the bells and whistles that yours does. But even still, I mean, even if you made it more automated, I had to find them first. And then I have to go document them in my system. And there's a lot of cutting and pasting, and there's a lot of room for human error. And I think, anytime that you can automate something like that, like we've done through this integration here, you eliminate that human error, you eliminate hours and hours and hours of work. And to your point, now, back in the day, it was, are you doing a risk assessment once a year? Now the question is, are you living in a system of risk assessment, right? Are you constantly assessing your risk? Are you constantly adapting to the threats that come at you? And you can't truly say that you're doing that if you don't know things like how many local admin accounts exist out there, right? The story I tell all the time is, a year and a half into an environment that I've been working for a long time, great customer, you got somebody's computer keeps doing something stupid, and you find out that this person's a local admin. They're using some old IT guy's account that only they had the password to, that this person was given years ago. And back then, I didn't have a way of finding it. I would have had to literally log into every single system and look all the way through it. And we just didn't do it. So I think it's really critical the way that automation is pulling these things together. Stuff like privilege access management and documentation that historically didn't have a lot to do with each other now become a unified tool for compliance and audit. And I think that's a fabulous thing that we're seeing there. I got a couple more questions that are maybe a little bit, I try to stay out of the technical weeds too much, but I do have a couple of questions. Kevin, I'll kick one back to you. So can you talk about that technician verification piece? I know that we've talked a lot today about the documentation in the client environment, but before our technicians are even given access to things like Hudu and the way that they're working on the day-to-day operations, talk to me about how technicians validate who they are and what we're doing out there to give them, or give the business owners, control over what their techs can do and see.
Yeah, so I mean, we support many methods to logging into like a CyberQP account. We also have the ability to kind of control those, what we call just-in-time accounts, for when a technician is logging on to the system, to make sure that we are doing the validation and attestation of who is actually logging on to those accounts. And same thing we can do for like a help desk validation tool. So to talk about who's calling into your help desk, who's talking to your techs, before they even go and look up in Hudu, what the standard operating procedures or what they need to look for. Having a tool inside of CyberQP that actually validates you are talking to who you're actually talking to through a support ticket or through the phone call if they come, directly into the help desk, is a vitally important thing. And a lot of times what we see is, partners in Hudu are documenting that as kind of a validation step before you move on to doing whatever piece of work you are, if it's working on a ticket. So a lot of partners who are using both of us kind of see the benefits of having a Hudu and CyberQP, and that better together kind of thing that we have right now is really, really powerful. If you're looking at what you have inside of Hudu and what you get with CyberQP, a lot of that is going to be there. And so when it comes to actually securing who has access to those things, we have all of the the regular integrations as far as accounts through SSO, MFA, and then we also support eMFA through help desk validation as well, just to make sure that the end user adoption of that types of features is really seamless from that perspective. So we're doing quite a lot. That's one of the most important things from a cybersecurity perspective, is actually making sure you're talking to the right individual you're talking to, whether it's an end user or whether it's a technician or whether it's, inside of a system already.
Well, and that's kind of the evolution of access management, right? It began with, okay, I got to rotate a password, and now it's, I need to verify. I say it all the time in a lot of my presentations. Trust sucks, right? We know that trust is a 4-letter word when it comes to cybersecurity, and so now privilege access management as a concept has really gone way beyond I need to rotate passwords, and it's verify and validate everything. Verify the technician, verify the end user, validate the level of access that you've got to have, validate the password hygiene within the system. We're trying to eliminate trust at every single level on the CyberQP side. So Ken, Jordan, I'll turn that back around to you guys, because I think there's a similar evolution happening in your world. And I guess that evolution that I see is an evolution between what was documenting. I'm not going to say for the sake of documentation, but you were documenting so it made it easier to do your job as an MSP. You were documenting for internal IT hygiene, to cut down on clicks, right? Like it was a functional thing. So how does that differ, documentation of yesterday as a functional thing versus documentation of today, which I feel is moving more and more and more towards compliance and cyber insurance requirements as the driving need behind it?
I mean, yes, 100%. To me, yes, documentation is more about efficiency, and it's about consistency and security. And so together, with that level of documentation, it just enables an information security program and processes and practices that you can, attest. You can present that documentation to an auditor, and if your documentation is good enough, like you mentioned further, like when you have a thorough set of documentation and you have thorough policies in place that are granular, that auditor looks at that, and they look at the high level of the process, or the goal, or whatever we're looking at, and then they look at the detailed steps that you have in place. They can see that you thought out every detail, every step it takes to complete this process. And so again, right there, that goes to show the level of maturity. You're not ad hoc at that point. You're refining and you're updating this documentation annually, if not more. And so that means you're taking the time to see, okay, this is what we're doing. How can we do this better? How can we do this more securely? And so those things right there, they go a long way to paint the picture of the culture in your organization. And so that has a lot of impacts. Again, that's going to save you a lot of time, effort, and energy in an audit, because they're going to focus on, okay, where is the documentation light is at? That's kind of like the shadow area of this organization. And so they may focus there. So you might have reduced your scope quite a bit, or the scope of actual, all right, we need samples pulled because we don't know, you don't have a process. So we don't know if your SMEs know how to consistently do this, and so documentation, it definitely answers. It's a preemptive answer to a lot of the questions the auditors have. They don't have to be in a meeting with you, on a call with you. They can review your documentation and then pinpoint where they feel like there may be some residual risk left over. And then again, a lot of cyber insurance policies, they're going to want to understand what you have in place. And there's ways that you can, if you have a documented information security program that's covering, there's certain areas that they really focus on to make sure that, hey, you have control, institutional level control over these processes. And it very well can result in a reduction in your insurance premium, because they know, hey, there's less risk, because they know the security posture is being managed, and it's being managed thoroughly. And they reflect that in their, in their algorithms, in the way that they price their policies.
And there's a nasty flip side to that too. That's the positive side. The flip side is when you have an incident, which eventually virtually all of us are going to have an incident, right? Like, I mean, if you stay in business long enough, especially if you're an MSP or an IT service provider at any level, one of these days, whether it's you or your client, somebody's going to get breached. When you have that happen and insurance goes to pay, one of the first things insurance is going to ask for is documentation. I've been down this path many, many times. And in that documentation and in the proof that what you were doing was right in the first place, they're going to juxtapose what you give them against the forms that you filled out and that risk assessment, that policy that you filled out that asks you all those weird questions, and they're all IT related. They're going to look at what you show them versus what you said you have. So one of the things that they look at first in terms of an audit is actually that least privilege, least access piece. They say, okay, so for example, God forbid something happens and privileged account gets hacked. Somebody goes out there and they steal the credentials out of Hudu, or they steal the credentials out of this MSP's help desk. One of the first things they're going to ask is, okay, this account that got controlled, what does that person do? And if that's a level 1 help desk technician and I stole their account access and that gave me super admin to all these customers, you have a real problem. And insurance may not pay. Because they've asked every single time you filled out that form, do you ensure that your people are operating with the least privilege required to do their job? Do you evaluate the privilege that you're giving these people in your organization and determine that they only have the amount of privilege and control required to do what they do on a daily basis? And the truth is, if you blanketly hand out access to everything in Hudu and you go, hey guys, listen, there's 14 of you here, everybody, this is where we keep everybody's admin passwords, and you let those people drop in, it's a real problem for you on the back end. There's a couple of cases that are happening right now, and I don't like breach shaming, so I'll leave the name of the organization out of this. I think you're careful throwing rocks in case one day it's your day in the barrel. But there's a law firm, I will say this, out of New York, that's actually being sued by their cyber liability insurance company. They were dropped during the middle of the breach case. They're not going to cover them anymore, and they're actually suing for the money that they spent defending them up to this point back. And the reason for that is a lack of least privilege and a lack of documentation. So they didn't have the system security plan in place that they said they did. They were missing significant documentation in and around the systems that got breached themselves, who had access to what, when, and how. And they weren't able to show at any level that what they had done through their service provider or themselves was truly enforcing what we're talking about today, right? And so that to me is one of the big nightmare scenarios. Is we pay a lot of money for cyber liability insurance. It is not easy to get anymore. It gets more expensive every year. The questions get deeper. I mean, it's an investment as a business in just keeping this coverage. And then to find out that bad practices inside, poor documentation, bad password hygiene, bad access management hygiene voids that policy out. I mean, imagine if that could happen in health insurance. If, smoking that cigarette meant you don't get any kind of cancer coverage, right? Like that changes your whole perspective. And I don't think people are looking at cyber liability through the same lens that they look at something like health insurance. But reality is you get dropped just as fast. So I think that's something that, all the partners out there need to be painfully aware of, is when you're answering yes to these questions on the cyber liability insurance form that asks, are you managing your documentation correctly? Do you have least privilege enforced? Are you doing these things? Man, these are not just check boxes. These are questions that can affect the rest of your life. And I don't.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that, Paul, just
please.
While we're doing a nice PSA for all of the partners out there, is, inside of those policies and stuff like that, you do really want to review it and see what it says about your end user accounts as well. Because what we've done a lot of, and what a lot of people's understandings are, is they talk about just their accounts and just their technicians' accounts. But you do have some liability sometimes inside of these cyber insurance policies to also make sure that your privileged access accounts are correct for the role, including all of the accounts on the networks that you manage, which includes your end users. And a lot of the language is very, lawyery, which is as broad as they can possibly make it. So even though a breach might happen through, someone outside of your organization for a customer that you manage for, if that account is overprivileged and you should have been managing that and taking away local admin account, for example, that's something a cybersecurity policy may include. And that's something with our end user elevation tool, we help identify, discover all of those accounts, and we can help remove all of those overprivileged accounts in a way that's not impactful to the end users at all, so that they never really notice that they don't have the admin accounts that they used to have and are used to. So we can do process-based elevation, make it seamless for their perspective. We have a new audit mode feature that just came out to just kind of passively monitor all of those accounts when we do discover them. That's something I would, in the framework of compliance and what Paul was talking about, brush up, take a look at what your PDF file that your insurance company sent you last year or 5 years ago, whenever it was, and take a good hard look at it and say, oh, I do need to be doing more about, my dentist office, and not all of the dentists at an office need to be local administrators.
And I'll throw a bone to the Hudu team here, and then document it. Pull in.
Yeah.
We're collecting this stuff for you. We give you these reports. We give you this data. You need to pull it. You need to make sure that is in your documentation system, in the place where those auditors are going to look later. So that's one of the, call it better together things that we're doing here, is we're going to give you this data. This is the place it's supposed to go. That's why these guys have built this tool. That's what this stuff is supposed to do. And therefore, when these auditors come knocking, or God forbid you're dealing with this issue, you have these kind of single pane of glass. We've handled the back end for it. We've created that least privilege, that zero standing privilege. You guys hold the proof to that, right? And you're going to carry that forward with the proof to all of these other layers. And ideally, you're handing over one easy to manage, simple to audit, simple to understand set of controls and systems that say, hey, look, we did our best. We understood the requirements in front of us. We understood the power that comes with the, privilege that we hold here. And we've tried to do the right thing. You don't have to be perfect. I said this over and over and over again throughout my career. Compliance is not perfection. Right? Compliance is adherence to your own policy. I used to call it's a marathon with no finish line, right? So this is how you show you're running, right? You show it through your documentation, through your practices, through things like least privilege. And by working, I'll shamelessly say, with groups like Hudu and CyberQP, who are out here and not building tools randomly and not throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, but are deliberately building these tools to help you address this problem on a daily basis. And that's why we've partnered with Hudu. It's why I think this webinar today was really important, is because together we can build a better, safer way to say, look, we're working in best practices. We're documenting everything as we go. We've put all these things in place. So God forbid, if it's ever your day out there in the barrel, you can at least mitigate the pain, eliminate it as fast as humanly possible, and prove you did the right things going into it. You can pass an audit with a breach. I've seen it a million times. It happens every single day. You have an incident, you have an audit, they come back and they say, look, you were doing the right thing. It's when documentation falls down. It's when access management falls down. And it's when you give everybody in the boat the keys and you go, hey, anybody can randomly drive this thing. That's when you've got a problem. Now, guys, I know we are kind of coming up to about the 45-minute mark, and I like to try to be respectful to people that have jumped in here and joined us this afternoon, maybe give them a few minutes back. So I'm going to give it back to each one of you. I'll start on the Hudu side. If you guys have anything you want to kind of leave us with today, I think that would be great. And then as we do this, we are going to share. You can book a demo with either solution, CyberQP or Hudu, by using those QR codes right there. You can also email sales at either organization. So guys, before we wrap up today, let's start with you, Ken, and then Jordan and Kevin, give us something to leave with today.
Well, to sum up my thoughts from this call is, tools like Hudu and CyberQP, they take you a long way, as far as meeting your compliance goals. You want to do due process and be due diligent. You want to know what to do, and you want to be able to show that you're doing it. So you need a comprehensive information security program with capabilities such as Hudu and CyberQP in place, so that in the event that there is a breach, you can say, we knew what to do, and we did it. And not only did we do it, we did it with some tools that are on the bleeding edge of technology. And so at the end of the day, like you mentioned earlier, everybody at some point will have some sort of a breach. There's nation state attackers out there. There's 0 days that, no matter what you have in place, you're going to be at risk. But you have to do your part and make sure that you've put thought, time, effort, and energy into managing your risk. And like I said, together with these tools, it'll get you there. So just keep that in mind as you go through your security journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. Jordan?
Yeah, very well put, Ken. And kind of, reiterating on that, that's kind of where a documentation product really can assist you with some of these, is not making the compliance a once a year type checkbox. It's a continuous thing that you're developing and maintaining, so that when it comes to those audits and that time to really hit those compliance checks, like Paul and Ken and Kevin have been saying this whole talk, it's the way to hand that off to these auditors and quickly get your compliance checks finished, complete, and have them be accurate. Other than that, if you are curious, about booking a call or talking with the Hudu team, obviously the CyberQP team as well, on any of what we've talked about today, use the QR code. Feel free to email us, like Paul said, sales@hudu.com, on our website, hudu.com, however you'd like. Other than that, it's been a pleasure. Paul, Kevin, thanks for hosting this webinar. It's been very insightful to myself even. So I really appreciate your knowledge and your time on this call.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Jordan. Kevin, what you got for us to round it out?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about our products and working together is when you do want to go for compliance and you are getting an audit, take the stress away, set up CyberQP so that you have no concerns about what accounts are out there. What's in your environment, the current state of it. It's all tracked. It's all auditable. Exactly where it is. Make, your auditor's life a little easier by having CyberQP coupled with Hudu. Really makes your life easier in the future. But more importantly is it really makes your guys' accounts and your end users much more secure. Make sure that any breaches that are happening are not, just someone logging in and just going everywhere in your network. And we can really solve for that by just making sure that you don't have standing privilege and you don't have standing access inside of your systems. It's very simple, very easy to do. So it's been a great webinar. It's a great topic. I know we'll probably be back on many more of these. It's been a pleasure working with Hudu as well.
Awesome. Well, guys, that was fabulous. I concur with everything that's been said. I think this was really good. I hope this has been helpful to the folks out there. I'll leave it with this. Compliance is not about what you're doing or what you did. It's about what you can prove. And so whether it's through documentation, least privilege, through being able to go in and illustrate that you put these things in place, that's when it's going to get your feet out of the fire, nothing else. So whether you're doing the right thing or not, guys, without the documentation to prove it, without the reporting to prove it, without those systems in place, you're not going to be able to pass those audits. Compliance is it's like Zen. It's a state of being, right? And so you've got to be able to illustrate that at any given moment. Folks, I hope this is helpful. Again, I'm Paul Redding with CyberQP. Thanks to the Hudu team for joining us today. This has been really fabulous, guys. We enjoy working with you. Looking forward to building a great relationship and helping our partners together. Thanks very much, everybody. Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.